Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's video, and today I'm going to dive into my presentation of a summary of this great book, which is titled Science of the Cosmos, Science of the Soul, The Pertinence of Islamic Cosmology to the Modern World by William Chittick. I gave you a pretty good introduction to that yesterday, and so I'm not going to do it again today. You can view that previous video, and now this is going to be me jumping right into what I wrote in my PDF that I will post on my website. In the opening paragraph, there's a lot there that has already been presented in the previous video, so I'm going to skip the opening paragraph and jump to the second paragraph of my intro, and away we go. Okay, Chittick presents a discussion of Sufi Islamic philosophy in the context of the state of modern society, with a focus on the nature of thought. Here is an excerpt from chapter 3, which is found on the back of the dust jacket. Okay, I'm just going to read it straight from the dust jacket. And it says, "Thought determines our present situation and our final outcome. What about the content of thought? Toward what end should thought be directed? The position of the Islamic tradition has always been that thought must be focused on what is real, and nothing is truly real but God, the real. The whole activity of thought must be ordered and arranged so that it begins and ends with the supreme reality. Moreover, moment by moment, thought must be sustained by awareness of the real. Forgetting God, one needs to recall, was Adam's sin. In his case, the sin was quickly forgiven because he immediately remembered. But most people do not remember, especially in modern times, and the consequences have been disastrous. As the Quran puts it, they forget God, so God forgets them. Being forgotten by God is to be cut off from the awareness of reality and to fall into illusion and unreality. True thought, then, accords with the divine spirit that lies at the core of human awareness. It is to understand things as they are. Things can only be understood as they are if one is aware of them in relation to the Creator who sustains them moment to moment. True thought is to see things in relation to God, and this is precisely the meaning of Tawhid." Okay, so Tawhid is a word that I presume is Arabic, and it is used very, very frequently in this book. So get used to it. Okay. And the definition is forthcoming. Okay. Let me say that Chittick is an excellent writer, and the book is very readable. I'm only going to present boiled down highlights chosen to state the important concept. I hope at least to do justice to the message and to inspire readers to engage in further exploration of traditional Islamic philosophy. Now, this is Chittick's introduction. Much of the book develops implications of a distinction between two ways of knowing that is basic to the great religions. I focus on the differentiation that is made between transmitted knowledge and intellectual knowledge. Transmitted knowledge is acquired through others, such as through books, teachers, and experts. Intellectual knowledge cannot be passed on and is acquired only through training the mind to allow attaining knowledge through self-discovery. The search for intellectual knowledge in Islamic civilization was undertaken in two broad fields of learning, philosophy and Sufism. Chittick points out that these two fields of learning diverge from transmitted sciences by understanding the meaning of things within the context of understanding the self that knows. So science does not understand things in relation to the self, whereas Islamic philosophy and Sufism both recognize that real understanding must be connected to an awareness of the self. Okay? The chosen title, Science of Cosmos, Science of the Soul, highlights science and connects it to the unscientific term soul. Chittick then presents a statement of the structure of the book, which I will admit. Chapter 1, A Vanishing Heritage. Quote, the intellectual tradition in Islam has addressed 4 basic topics: God, the cosmos, the human soul, and interpersonal relationships. In studying these topics, one may achieve different levels of understanding. A student can memorize the Quran to know what the Prophet has said, or one may think deeply and ask questions such as why. This will lead to actual understanding. The first type of knowing is transmitted knowledge, and it is imitation and accepting the statement of authority. The second type is intellectual knowledge. It is not imitative memorization. Rather, it derives from deep understanding. Chittick explains at length the nuances of the differences between the two, and states that both types are necessary for proper intellectual development. Okay. Intellectual understanding in the strict sense is found in the highest pinnacle of human selfhood, which philosophers call the actual intellect. It is asserted that intellectual understanding is essential and crucial for the survival of religion. Humans are naturally thinking beings, but not everyone thinks for the sake of understanding. Most people simply go about their daily routine and imagine that they fully understand the situation. But they don't. The next question is, what is correct thinking? What is the proper goal of thinking? The history of Islamic intellectualism is varied, but the central principle remains unmovable. The central principle is that the unity of God. By this is not meant simple monotheism. It expresses the truth that all of reality is one, because reality has one source and sustenance, and this unity is divine, and all of creation is expression of that essential unity, God. In Islam, all correct thinking begins from this principle and lead the thinker back to that very same principle. Chittick states the goal of Islam as follows, quote, in general terms, Islam's goal is to bring people into harmony with the way things actually are. In other words, it is to bring them back to the presence of God from which they emerged in the first place. So the way the book is laid out is, you have your basic chapter, looks like so. That's the beginning of the chapter. And then within the chapter, there are various sub-paragraph headings. Okay. And I'll show you an example, okay, which I'm about to get into. And for instance, right now, I'm about to discuss the current situation. There you go. So I'm quoting from, or paraphrasing from, the current situation, which is on page 8. This is a paraphrase. Chittick laments that the Islamic intellectual tradition, based on the goal of the transformation of the human soul, has largely disappeared. Modern Islamic thinkers do not think Islamically, according to Islamic principles and paradigms. They may be good practicing Muslims, but they think according to the current cultural zeitgeist. Now, subsection, the gods of modernity, page 12. Modern thought does not take its starting principle to be the unity of reality. which is God is one. This is the basis of Islamic thought. Chittick asserts that today's thinking is incoherent, lacking a central orientation or purpose. There is no single God. The gods that people worship are those points of reference that give meaning and purpose to their lives. And here is a list of Chittick's modern gods: freedom, equality, evolution, progress, science, medicine, nationalism, socialism, democracy, Marxism, capitalism. And here's some more subtle and dangerous gods that include care, communication, consumption, development, education, information, standard of living, management, model, planning, production, project, resource, service, system, and welfare. So any of those ideas can be the basic purpose that a modern school of ideology might choose as their most significant issue. You know, like some people believe that freedom is essential and central, or democracy, or capitalism. You know, so you can see how all these are like sort of sub-gods, and there's a multitude of them, okay? And none of them unite reality as a whole. Okay, so Chittick points out these are abstract terms that seem to be scientific, so they carry an aura of authority in a world in which science is one of the most important gods. Each of them turns something indefinable into a limitless ideal and awakens endless needs. And once these needs are awakened, they seem to be self-evident and quickly turn into necessities. The spokespeople for these tyrannical concepts, gods, gain power because they represent science, freedom, and progress. Even those who claim to worship the old god twist his teachings to facilitate worship in one of these new gods. So now Chittick is going to talk about the goal of intellectual understanding, starting on page 16. And this is where we get the definition of Tawhid. Tawhid. Tawhid is a central and foundational concept in Islamic philosophical discourse, and this is the general definition. Tawhid, literally, to unite or make one, refers to the principle of monotheism in Islam. It also includes the injunction that divinity is not attributable to anything or anyone else. This is an overarching non-dualism derived from the existence of a single and absolute truth that transcends the world, a unique, independent, and indivisible being that is independent of all creation. It is the religion's central and single most important concept upon which a Muslim's entire religious adherence rests. In Islamic mysticism, the Sufism and Iranian mysticism, Tawhid is the affirmation in speech of God's unity, but also, just as importantly, a practical and existential realization of that unity. It is done by rejecting the concepts tied to the world of multiplicity, to isolate the internal from the temporal in a practical way. So they reject that. They reject isolating the eternal from the temporal. Okay, so the ideal of this is a radical purification of all worldliness, all focus on external things for the sake of externals. For some Sufi mystic philosophers, such as Arabi, Tawhid also includes the idea of the unity of existence expressed by this verse from the Quran. Witness that there is no existence in the world except God, and that all things are perishing, temporary, except the face of God. So this sort of seems to blur God and creation into one reality. Okay, but that is Tawhid. So Professor Chittick uses the term Tawhid in its full Sufi mystical sense. In this section, he discusses the challenges modern Islamic society faces when trying to maintain Tawhid consciousness. Genuine Islamic consciousness is not acquired through transmitted learning. Actual understanding of God is necessary to be able to resist the pull of false gods, which would adapt Islamic society to attempt to achieve the ideals of modern Western society and secularism. Chittick warns many Muslims today recognize that the West has paid too high a price for modernization and secularization. They see that various social crises have arisen in all modern societies, and they understand that these crises are somehow connected with the loss of religious tradition, the ultimate meaninglessness of modern life, and the devaluation of ethical and moral guidelines. Furthermore, he says, when people refuse to live in harmony with transcendent principles, Tawhid, that determine the way things actually are, that bring about chaos and disorder in the natural and social environments. Okay, that has been 17 minutes. So I think it's time to call that a wrap on this particular episode, and we'll begin again on page 18, which is subtitled The Rejection of Tradition. So this is, the history of the Islamic intellectual tradition. So on page 18, we're going to pick it up in the next video.